600.
Who's the registered owner of this car?
It's mine, Marcus Hale. Title's in my name.
Okay, and where are you headed today?
We're gonna.
I'm talking to him right now.
Disneyland. We just bought tickets. Kids are in the back.
Step out for me real quick. Routine.
All right, I'm unbuckling. My hands are coming out.
Hands out. Turn around. Step back.
It's the owner of the vehicle.
What has started as a routine traffic stop escalated into an arrest, and millions of dollars in legal consequences after a white male police officer decided that a black man driving a $500,000 car did not belong behind the wheel. But what the officer didn't know yet was that this decision would follow him for years. Marcus Hill is driving toward Disneyland with his family when red and blue lights suddenly flood the rearview mirror. The laughter in the back seat cuts off instantly. That sudden silence matters more than it seems. Marcus signals and pulls over smoothly, easing the $487,000 car onto the shoulder. His hands stay visible on the steering wheel, calm and controlled. At this point, Marcus still believes this will end quickly. He's wrong. The officer approaches slowly, not rushing, not cautious, but deliberate. His eyes move over the rims, the hood, the interior, and only then the driver. That order is important, and what it reveals will become clear in seconds. The officer does not explain why the car was stopped. He does not mention speed, signals, or safety. Instead, he asks if the car belongs to Marcus. Marcus answers yes and immediately hands over registration and insurance. The paperwork clearly lists his name as the owner. What happens next is the first real warning sign. The officer barely looks at the documents. He asks the same question again, slower this time. This is the moment the stop changes direction. The officer studies the interior again and asks what Marcus does for a living. The question has nothing to do with traffic, and that's when the tone shifts. Marcus answers calmly and says he is a judge. He does not emphasize it. He does not challenge the officer. The officer reacts with disbelief. He lets out a short laugh and looks back at the car. Then he says the price out loud, $500,000. That number is not mentioned by accident. The officer repeats it, as if saying it again will expose something Marcus is hiding. This is where suspicion replaces procedure. Marcus explains that he bought the car legally, that his income and investment support it, and that everything is documented. But what happens next shows that facts no longer matter. The officer ignores the explanation and asks how the car was paid for, and at this point the paperwork in his hand might as well not exist. Inside the car, Alyssa feels the shift immediately. She recognizes this moment from stories she's heard her whole life. She asks why these questions are necessary. The officer shuts her down without hesitation. His tone sharpens. Authority replaces curiosity, and the atmosphere inside the car tightens instantly. The children sit frozen in the back seat, watching through the windshield. They don't understand what's happening yet, but they know something is wrong. Marcus is told to step out of the vehicle. No clear reason is given. The officer says the situation doesn't add up, and that phrase will matter later. Marcus complies without hesitation. He opens the door slowly and steps out with his hands visible. What he does next is deliberate. He moves carefully, knowing that even small movements can be misinterpreted. Once outside, the officer positions Marcus several feet away from the car. That distance is intentional, and it changes everything. The officer continues referencing the car, its value, its appearance, comparing it silently to the man standing beside it. Marcus remains calm. He answers every question directly. But calm doesn't de-escalate the situation. The officer interprets calm as suspicious. Then comes the comment. It's quiet, casual, generalizing, and the meaning is unmistakable. This is the moment Marcus realizes this won't end with paperwork. He is told he is being detained. No charge is explained, no violation is named. That lack of clarity will come back later. The officer turns toward the patrol car and removes a set of handcuffs. The metal catches the sunlight. And what happens next is the moment everything breaks. Marcus places his hands behind his back without resistance. The cuffs close. Inside the car, Alyssa gasps. One child starts crying, the other doesn't move at all. Cars slow down, someone raises a phone, and in that moment, a traffic stop becomes a public incident, because what just happened on the roadside will not stay there. This is only the beginning. Marcus is placed in the back of the patrol car, the door closing with a dull sound that seals him away from his family. What happens inside that car is quieter, but it matters just as much. From the back seat, Marcus can no longer see his children clearly. That separation will later be described as one of the most damaging moments of the entire stop. Outside, Alyssa is left sitting in the passenger seat trying to keep her voice steady while her children ask questions she cannot answer. What the officer does next leaves her without any reassurance. The officers continue talking among themselves near the hood of the luxury car. The price is mentioned again. Ownership is questioned again. What's striking is what never comes up. There is still no traffic violation, no citation, no explanation for the original stop. Another patrol car arrives. Backup always changes the tone, but not in the way Marcus hopes. Instead of reassessing the situation, the second officer falls in line immediately. No one asks why the stop began. No one challenges the detention. That lack of questioning will become a central issue later. Alyssa asks if she can step out of the car to speak with Marcus. She is told to remain seated. This decision will later be cited as unnecessary and emotionally harmful. The officers begin discussing whether to search the vehicle. The conversation happens within earshot of the family. Consent is never clearly requested. Authority is implied. That distinction will matter. The car is searched. Every compartment, every panel, the trunk. What they find is nothing. No contraband, no irregularities, no evidence of any crime. But Marcus remains in handcuffs. At this point, the justification for the detention no longer exists, except for the belief that started everything, and that belief is still driving the situation. Minutes pass, traffic flows, the sun shifts slightly. For the family, time feels suspended. Eventually, Marcus is removed from the patrol car. The cuffs are taken off without ceremonies. No apology is offered. No explanation is given. He is told he is free to go. That moment is almost harder than the arrest, because there is no closure, no acknowledgement that anything went wrong. The family does not continue to Disneyland. They drive home instead, the car silent, the excitement gone. What should have been a memory becomes something no one wants to talk about. That night, the children replay the scene in fragments. Why was Dad taken away? Why didn't the officer believe him? Marcus doesn't sleep. Instead, he begins reconstructing the stop in his mind, not emotionally, but legally. Timelines, statements, deviations from protocol. He already knows this will not end quietly. Within days, footage from the stop begins circulating online, not because Marcus releases it, but because someone else already did. What the officer thought was a private moment of authority becomes public record. News outlets request comment. The department releases a short statement calling the stop routine. That word will not age well. Internal Affairs opens an investigation. Bodycam footage is pulled. Policies are reviewed. What investigators notice immediately is what never appears on the footage. There is no stated reason for the stop. There is no traffic violation documented. There is repeated fixation on the value of the vehicle, and there is repeated doubt about ownership. Marcus hires legal counsel, not to make a statement, but to preserve facts. Depositions are scheduled. Officers are questioned under oath. When asked why the stop began, answers vary. That inconsistency becomes a problem. When asked why ownership was questioned despite documentation, explanations become vague. That vagueness becomes evidence. Experts are brought in to review the footage. Former officers, policy analysts, they all point to the same issue. The stop escalated based on assumption, not behavior. As the case develops, damages are calculated: emotional distress, public humiliation, impact on children, loss of trust, loss of safety. By the time settlement discussions begin, projected costs exceed $7 million. And what started as a question about a car now threatens careers, budgets, and reputations. But the most important question hasn't been answered yet. Why did the officer decide this car didn't belong to Marcus in the first place? That answer will come next. The next phase of the case turns away from the roadside and toward the people who made the decisions. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Investigators begin with the officer who initiated the stop. His record is requested. Training history, prior complaints. What they find doesn't end the case, but it explains it. The officer has no history of excessive force, but there is a pattern of stops involving high-end vehicles. That detail stands out immediately. Several prior encounters involve questioning ownership before identifying violations. That similarity will matter later. In interviews, the officer explains his actions as intuition. He says something felt off. That explanation sounds vague because it is. When asked to define what triggered the stop, the officer references the car's value again, not speed, not behavior. That answer creates a problem. Because training materials are clear, vehicles are not probable cause. Investigators pull department policy manuals, sections on bias, sections on traffic stops, sections on escalation. The language is unambiguous. Officers are trained to articulate objective reasons. Suspicion based on appearance alone is explicitly discouraged. So the question becomes unavoidable. Why did the officer ignore that training? Internal emails begin surfacing next. Communications between supervisors in the days after the stop. The tone is cautious, defensive. There is early concern about optics, about public reaction, about the video, not about the stop itself. That detail does not go unnoticed. As the case moves forward, depositions begin. Officers are sworn in, cameras roll, lawyers ask careful questions. The initiating officer is asked to explain why he repeated the ownership question after receiving documentation. His answer is hesitant. He says he wanted to make sure. That answer raises a follow-up question. Make sure of what? When pressed, the officer says he believed the vehicle might be stolen or fraudulently obtained, but he cannot identify a single indicator supporting that belief. That gap becomes central. The second officer is deposed next. He admits he never questioned the reason for the stop, and he assumed the first officer had cause. That assumption is common, and it is dangerous. Experts later testified that this kind of assumption stacking is how bias moves unchecked through enforcement. Each officer relies on the judgment of the one before him, and no one stops to ask why. Marcus testifies later. His tone is calm, controlled. He describes the stop without exaggeration, without anger. That restraint makes his testimony harder to dismiss. He explains the moment he realized the stop wasn't about traffic. The second ownership question, the fixation on price, the way documentation stopped mattering. The jury listens closely. Alyssa testifies next. She describes watching her children fall silent. She describes being shut down for speaking. She describes seeing handcuffs come out without explanation. That testimony lands heavily. Child psychologists are consulted. Experts discuss how witnessing a parent detained impacts long-term trust and authority. The damage is no longer theoretical. It is measurable. As the civil case advances, the city's legal team runs cost projection, defense costs, settlement ranges, policy reform expenses. The number grows quickly. $7 million becomes a realistic estimate, and the city begins looking for an exit. Settlement negotiations start quietly. No admission of wrongdoing, no public apology, but policy changes are agreed to. Additional training, clearer reporting requirements, mandatory articulation of probable cause, all of it tied back to this stop. The officer is not fired, he is reassigned. That decision creates backlash. Community leaders speak out. Civil rights groups weigh in. The case becomes symbolic, not because Marcus is a judge, but because the assumptions applied to him would apply to anyone else. The settlement is finalized. The amount exceeds $7 million. No one celebrates. Marcus continues serving on the bench, but the experience changes him. He becomes more deliberate, more cautious. He pays closer attention to cases involving traffic stops. He asks different questions now. The family eventually returns to Disneyland, months later. The children enjoy the rides, but the memory remains. Some experiences don't end when the cuffs come off. This case closes on paper, but the pattern it exposed remains open, Because the question was never about a car, it was about who is believed and who is not. After the settlement is signed, the paperwork closes quickly. The public assumes the story is over. It isn't. Behind the scenes, the department begins rewriting policy language that had existed for years but had rarely been enforced. That alone raises a question no one wants to answer. Training memos are updated. New checklists are introduced. Officers are reminded to articulate cause clearly and early. But what's missing from the training materials is just as important as what's added. There is no direct acknowledgement of bias, no explicit reference to the assumptions that drove this stop, and that omission matters. Internal reviewers note that the officer followed procedure after the stop escalated but failed at the moment it mattered most, the beginning. That finding is quietly filed away. The officer returns to duty in a different assignment. No press release, no announcement, just a transfer. For the department, this is damage control. For the community, it feels like avoidance. Public trust drops sharply in the months that follow. Complaint filings increase. Traffic stops involving luxury vehicles are scrutinized more closely. What happens next surprises even the department. Officers begin hesitating during stops. Not because they are unsure of the law, but because they are aware of cameras. That shift changes behavior, but not belief. Supervisors notice that stops decrease in frequency, but not evenly. Some neighborhoods see dramatic reductions, others see none. That imbalance sparks new questions. Data analysts begin reviewing stop patterns, income levels, vehicle values, driver demographics. The patterns don't disappear. They become harder to justify. Community meetings grow tense. Residents cite the case repeatedly, not for the outcome, but for what it revealed. And one question keeps coming up. If this can happen to a judge, what happens to everyone else? Marcus Reed returns to the bench with a different awareness than before. He does not mention the case publicly, but it follows him into every courtroom. He listens differently now, especially during testimony about traffic stops. When officers say something felt off or mature, Marcus pauses longer than he used to. That pause changes proceedings. Defense attorneys notice, prosecutors notice. The courtroom dynamic shifts subtly but permanently. Marcus begins asking officers to explain not just what they did, but why they did it in that moment. Some answers hold up, others collapse under scrutiny. Those moments ripple outward. Other judges begin doing the same. Not because of a directive, but because of example. Case law starts reflecting this shift. Opinions reference articulation more heavily, assumptions are challenged more directly, the impact spreads quietly, but it spreads. At home, the family changes too. The children no longer relax when police lights appear, even on television. That reaction doesn't fade with time. Alyssa becomes more protective, more vocal, less willing to assume good faith. None of this shows up in settlement documents. These are costs that never make it onto spreadsheets. Months later, the footage is used in training academies across the state, not officially endorsed, quietly circulated. Instructors pause the video at key moments. The second ownership question, the fixation on price, the absence of cause. Recruits are asked what went wrong. Some answer correctly, others struggle. That struggle is the point, because the case is no longer about Marcus Reed. It is about recognition, about catching the moment where a stop turns into something else, about understanding how quickly authority can drift when unchecked. And that is where this story leaves us. Not with closure, but with a warning, because the next stop won't involve a judge. And the next driver may not have $7 million worth of proof waiting on the other side. Years from now, most people will forget the names attached to this case. They will forget the dates, the filings, and even the dollar amount. What they won't forget is the image. A man standing on the side of the road, a family watching through glass, an officer holding handcuffs without being able to explain why. That image matters because it didn't come from chaos. It came from routine. Nothing about this stop began with violence. Nothing about it began with urgency. It began with a question that didn't need to be asked: ownership, belonging, legitimacy. And once that question entered the interaction, everything that followed became almost predictable. The paperwork stopped mattering, the answers stopped mattering, the behavior stopped mattering. Only perception remained. The city paid more than $7 million to close this case. Policies were rewritten, training was updated, statements were issued, but none of that erases the moment itself. Because systems don't fail loudly. They fail quietly, one assumption at a time. This case didn't expose a single bad decision. It exposed how easily decisions can drift when no one interrupts them. That is why this story continues to matter, not because the driver was a judge, but because the assumptions applied to him are applied every day to people without titles, without resources, and without cameras. The stop ended. The cuffs came off. The paperwork closed. But the question at the center of it all is still unanswered. Who gets the benefit of the doubt, and who never does? If you're still watching, it means this story stayed with you. If you want more real-world cases broken down moment by moment, without shouting, without spin, subscribe to the channel. These stories don't end at the roadside, and the next one is already happening.